It is 1683. The earth trembles under the weight of empire over Hungary's lowlands. A march of 150,000 troops headed west. It takes 3 hours for the columns of an army that is so large to pass a single spot. The July sky is obscured by the Ottoman Sultan's crescent banners. Grand Vizier Kar Mustafa Pasha, head of the world's most dreaded army, is in charge of them. He has left burned-out cities in his wake as he blazed a deadly trail throughout the Balkans. He now looks in the direction of Europe's crown jewel, Vienna. The way to Germany is open if Vienna falls. Italy trembles if Vienna falls. The broken kingdoms of Christendom fall like dominoes if Vienna falls. Mustafa has been promised a golden apple, the age-old emblem of global dominance, by the Sultan. Europe is aware of what is ahead if he delivers this last gem. However, Europe takes no action. Due to pride and political division, the Holy Roman Empire is weak. Vienna's emperor has already left. Unwilling to assist its adversary Austria, France observes from the background. The Italian states quarrel with one another. The wounds from the wars that split the continent are still being felt by Protestants and Catholics. The interests of the major powers come first. None perceive the abyss opening beneath their feet. There is just one individual who thinks that the darkness can be halted. Poland's King Jan III Sobieski. He is 60 years old, has fought 30 fights against both Turks and Tartars, and has been a fighter since he was a young boy. A deeply religious man who frightens those who do not share his beliefs. He sees duty where others see despair. He feels the hand of Providence beckoning him to stand where others see impossible odds. He had run out of kingdom. His army is only a few thousand strong and his treasury is empty, yet his faith is stronger than the sun above the Carpathian mountains. Vienna receives his message. Hold, I am coming. He doesn't request authorization, he doesn't wait for payment assurances. He just starts the longest forced march in Polish history by assembling all the men who are able to ride. Because Jan Sobieski is aware that certain times are outside the realm of computation. Because excellent men do not consider the cost when society is on the brink. They cover the cost. By the middle of July, Vienna is surrounded by Ottoman forces. 15,000 defending against 150,000. The walls were constructed long before stone could be broken by explosives. Count Ernst Rudiger, a man of iron will who is aware that they cannot prevail, is in charge of the little garrison on Starnberg. But he's not going to give up. The engines of the siege start up. The cannons roar day and night. Miners from the Ottoman Empire excavate behind the walls, bringing down bastions with smoke and fire. Every hour of the day, the defenders battle for every yard of wall. Within the city, time is measured in prayers and heartbeats. Kara Mustafa eats lamb and honey while relaxing in his silk tent. He constructs a city of tents so large that it takes an hour to walk from end to end while Vienna goes hungry. Foreign ambassadors are invited to observe the siege as a theatrical production. He has patience. He's already triumphant. His allies are hunger and time. Mustafa rejects the direct assault that his officers are urging. When famine will do the job, why sacrifice men? He's not looking north. He doesn't think anyone would be stupid enough to disagree with him. Everybody in Europe thought Vienna would fall as they saw the horizon burn. When was the question, not if. By inches the city is dying. Like a cloak over a burial, smoke looms over Vienna. With the exception of distant cannon fire and the cries of the injured, the streets remain quiet. Food gets scarce, then scarcer, then almost gone. Soup is made by boiling leather belts. Rats are turned into treats. Hunger, not Ottoman steel, kills the very young and very old first. Even lower water rushes. Disease spreads. Disagreements, fever, and unhealing wounds. They still fight, though. Alongside soldiers, civilians construct trenches.
The walls are guarded by elderly men. Young lads fix breaches by carrying stones. Women load muskets with steady hands. Count Starrenberg climbs the ramparts and counts the breaches every morning. Every morning there are more. 3 enormous holes in the outer defenses have been blown by the Ottomans.
There were only 4,000 fighting men left in the defenders. They've been in custody for 2 months. They cannot hold much longer. In his journal, Starrenberg writes, "We are living ghosts guarding a tomb, but we're not going to give up." Outside, Kara Mustafa becomes more conceited. Between the tents, merchants erect bazaars. Evenings are spent listening to music. He has already split Vienna's wealth in his head. But in the north, something changes. An army gathers well beyond the Ottoman lines. Despite being pathetically little by empire standards, it moves with intention. Every ally who is willing to respond has been summoned by King Jan Sobieski. Duke Charles of Lorraine, accompanied by 20,000 German and Austrian soldiers. A few thousand more are contributed by the princes of southern Germany, and Sobieski leads his Winged Hussars south from Poland, across 500 miles of storm and mountain. 3,000 Polish cavalry, the best heavy cavalry ever built in Europe. Knights wearing expensive steel armor will make more money in 10 lifetimes than a peasant would. They are insufficient. Despite being allied with the imperial army, they will only have 27,000 troops to fight the 80,000 Ottomans. The figures are insane. Suicide disguised as military preparation. Numbers don't matter to Sobieski. Duty is important to him. He writes to his wife, whom he loves, "To defend Vienna I go. If I die there, tell our kids about me, and that their father died fulfilling God's will." Desperation descends like frost inside the city as August bleeds into September. The walls are falling down more quickly than they can be fixed. The powder stockpiles are almost completely depleted. The Ottoman mines are almost finished. On the evening of September 9, Starrenberg delivers his final courier with a straightforward message over enemy lines. Don't come at all, or come now. We have hours, maybe days. Up the evening of September 10th, a rumor catches up like wildfire in Vienna. He claims to have seen signal fires on the far-off hills a century ago. Someone else says they heard trumpets resonating from the mountains. With their eyes strained toward the north, the people huddle on the walls. They saw it there on September 11th, just before daybreak. Thousands of banners were atop Kallenberg's hills.
The Holy Roman Empire's double-headed eagle, the Polish white eagle, Saxony, Franconia, and Bavaria standards. The army of deliverance has come. For the first time in weeks, church bells ring within Vienna. In public, people cry in the streets. They are unsure if this tiny force will be able to save them. However, they think they might not die alone. For the first time in 2 months, every home, every street, every heart is filled with a whisper. The King of Poland is on his way. Iron and will were used to write a prayer for the march south. King Jan Sobieski led his men across 500 miles of wilderness, through Carpathian passes where summer storms turned trails into rivers of mud, through rain-soaked rivers and jungles so dense that the sun disappeared for days. They were the fastest army in history. Sometimes they were 40 miles and on desperate days, 50 miles. In their saddles they slept. Vienna was dying, and every hour counted, so they ate in the saddle. Leading the charge were the Hussars. Even while they were still alive, the fabled knights had already become legendary. Warriors in armor that shone like sunlight caught in a bottle. Mounted on hardwood frames, eagle feather wings sprouted from their backs. Merely ornamentation, but generations perfected psychological weapons. They seemed larger than life because of the wings. And the final sound that innumerable adversaries ever heard was the strange whistling noise that occurred when 3,000 hussars rode at full charge. With an 18-foot lance of hollow wood that was both light enough to fit under one arm and powerful enough to pierce a man and his horse combined, each hussar was a lord of war. fully armored in plate and masculine. They were aristocratic, they were landowners, they were wealthy, possessed titles, and had servants. They could all have safely remained at home. Honor demanded that they ride to Vienna nevertheless, due to a call from their ruler. Because surviving isn't the only thing that matters. They were Europe's last real knights. The Polish monarch allied himself with the imperial army and Duke Charles of Lorraine at Tulln. Austrians and Poles who were not in love with one another suddenly stood shoulder to shoulder. Despite their supposed animosity, Catholic and Protestant soldiers accepted one another as brothers, because they would all perish in succession if Vienna fell, and Vienna was dying.
They were bonded by faith and survival. Old animosities vanished. The charge they knew was coming was all that mattered. The Allied force arrived at the Vienna forests on the evening of September 11. With no fires and no noise higher than a whisper, they set up camp among the trees. The commanders ascended to the top of Karlenberg at first light on September 12. Their breath was taken away from them by what they saw below. The Ottoman camp was miles long. 80,000 guys in perfect formation. There are tens of thousands of cavalry reserves. Bronze cannons abound in artillery parks. There were so many crescent banners that they resembled a second sky. There was free space between the city and the mountain. Ottoman firearms kept surveillance over kill zones. The weight of what they faced was felt even by Sobieski, who had witnessed every type of battlefield. 27,000 men versus 80,000 of the best Ottoman Empire soldiers. A younger leader might have been hesitant and waited for more favorable circumstances. However, the Janssees had an understanding that the Ottomans did not, that there are times in history when selfless sacrifice is required. Refusing to allow fear dictate your decisions is what defines courage, not the absence of fear. That virtuous folks don't ask for better chances when evil crowds the gates. All they do is pay the price of virtue. He turned to his officers. His voice was composed and full of unwavering assurance. "We'll launch our attack at midday, gentlemen. They'll be the hussars. Make peace with God." Men were kneeling in prayer across the Allied lines. Priests of the Catholic faith bestowed blessings. Hymns led by a Protestant chaplain. There was no separation between them for a single morning. All they were Christians in the dark. The hussars made a final inspection of their armor, tightened girths, tested the balance of their lances, and spoke softly to their horses. Some sent their last letters home. Others only breathed and closed their eyes, committing the scent of the morning air to memory. The army started to descend from Kennenberg about 1100 hours. First, the Ottoman skirmishes were fought by the infantry. The German cavalry then began to pound at the sides. From the south, the Austrians surged forward. It was functioning, albeit slowly. Too slowly. Vienna was impatient. In one last desperate drive, the defenders were hurling themselves against the siege lines as they made a final sortie inside the city. The city would fall regardless if the cavalry did not advance quickly. On the peak of a low ridge, King Sobieski sat atop his warhorse. 3,000 Winged Hussars formed a huge wedge behind him. 3,000 lances fell in unison. 3,000 prayers were said into thin air. He rides with his sons at his side, James and Alexander, their faces etched with resolve. The thunder started as the monarch held his saber aloft, allowing the blade to catch sunlight. On September 12, 1683, at midday, the heavens opened, not with lightning or rain, but with wings. Like a hammer thrown by God himself, 3,000 Polish hussars shot forth from the crest. As the rhythm increased and the ground started to tremble, they began at a trot and then a canter. They roared when the wind struck the feathered wings on their backs, a noise like to 1,000 eagles simultaneously plunging. Then they ran. Their trail was followed by 18,000 Allied cavalry. However, the hussars took the lead. The adversary saw the hussars first, descending the slope like a steel and rage avalanche. With the power like a mountain tumbling, the Polish wedge struck the Ottoman line. Even from Vienna's walls, the impact could be heard. Steel on steel, a thunderclap. Men were thrown off their saddles as 18-foot lances broke against Ottoman cavalry. Hussars didn't slow down. The first rank was punched first, followed by the second and third. The rider threw away each broken lance, pulled out his saber, continued to ride, and continued to kill. The Allied cavalry expanded the opening behind them. The Ottoman formation started to disintegrate. One unit broke and ran away first, then another. Then a whole regiment turned and fled. Then it broke completely. More quickly than any sword, panic spread. Those Ottoman soldiers who had resisted sieges turned and fled.
Chaos ensued as units that had never retreated fled. Defensive squares were attempted by the elite shock troops known as the Janissaries, who had never experienced defeat. Like wheat before a scythe, the Hussars rode them down. At once, King Sobieski was everywhere. His saber was hot at the hilt, his war horse was coated in blood, and his voice cut through the confusion. Beside him, his boys fought like the princes they were destined to be. Because rulers do it when the world is ending, he took the lead. From his silk pavilion, Khan Mustafa watched his army fall apart. As the horror played out, the man who had assured his sultan that Europe would be conquered stood motionless. At last he fled when he could see the Hussars in the distance. He left behind his own banner, his treasure, his charts, and the golden apple that was supposed to be in the sultan's palm. It all fled in a frantic attempt to avoid the wrath of the Winged Hussars. Nightfall brought an end to it. 80,000 Ottoman soldiers dispersed. On the field, 15,000 people died. The rest fled in utter disarray to the south. It was the Sultan's finest army to date, destroyed by a force one-third its size in a single afternoon. Vienna was spared. Europe was spared. King Jan Sobieski rode through Vienna's gates at sunset. People were crying, applauding, and kneeling along the streets. Youngsters flocked to touch his horse. Women tossed flowers. The hussar horse's hoofs were kissed by men. They appeared to be ghosts, emaciated from illness and hollow-eyed from famine. However, they were still alive. In the cathedral plaza, the monarch dismounted, drenched in blood, dust, and unfathomable fatigue. He uttered the words that would reverberate throughout history while kneeling in front of the altar of St. Stephen's Cathedral. Deosevich, veni, vidi. I arrived, I saw. God prevailed. We didn't win. I didn't win. Germany, Austria, or Poland did not conquer. God prevailed. Because in the fervor of victory, some men forget things that Yancey's understood. That bravery is a divine gift, that strength comes from sources other than the human body, that it takes more than just human effort to make the impossible possible. The siege was broken. For all time, the Ottoman advance was over. The crescent banners would never again pose a threat to Europe's center. Days earlier, the flow of history had looked insurmountable, yet one September afternoon it had turned. Thunder was the sound that caused it to turn. The sound of a mountain being pounded by hoofs, wings singing in the wind and thundering. The thunder of men who will not allow darkness to triumph. Europe stood against all reasoning, against all odds, against the logic of despair and the math of war. Because the Polish Winged Hussars galloped into mythology and bore the burden of civilization on their shoulders one September day. History was rocked by the Winged Hussars' thunder that day. Evidence that togetherness, bravery, and faith can change the world. Europe stood against all logic and against all odds, against the logic of despair and the math of war. because the Polish Winged Hussars galloped into mythology and bore the burden of civilization on their shoulders one September day. History was rocked by the Winged Hussars' thunder that day. Evidence that togetherness, bravery, and faith can change the world.
Europe stood against all logic and against all odds.